The next item of business is a statement by John Swinney on international solidarity to support Ukraine. The First Minister will take questions at the end of his statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on the First Minister.
Presiding Officer, just last Monday, all of Scotland's political leaders took part in a powerful and moving ceremony at Edinburgh Castle to mark 3 years since the start of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. We stood together with members of the Ukrainian community living here in Scotland to commemorate the time that has passed since the start of that invasion, but also to reaffirm our support for the people of Ukraine. Though we disagree on points of policy and politics in this chamber, which is right and proper in a parliamentary democracy, when it comes to upholding the values and principles of modern democracy, the Scottish Parliament stands behind Ukraine, resolute and unwavering. Regardless of our political views, everyone in this chamber understands that democracy is hard fought for and must never be taken for granted. Democracy must be cherished, defended and enhanced. This is the lesson of the 20th century. This is the lesson the people of Ukraine live and struggle and fight to teach us every day. The courage demonstrated by President Zelensky and by all Ukrainians since the first day of Russia's illegal full-scale invasion reaches far beyond the protection and the preservation of their own homeland. Ukrainians struggle and fight for all of Europe and for the protection and the preservation of all democratic nations. It is a struggle for the rule of law, for human rights, and to uphold the international norms which once ensured Europe knew guaranteed peace. The Ukrainian people are fighting for their homeland, for their future, but also for our future too. 3 years ago, Russia expected to flatten Ukrainian resistance within days. But despite a war that has caused years of unnecessary misery in a peaceful, sovereign and democratic nation, the power of the fight for democracy and all its freedoms has given the Ukrainian people their purpose as well as their most potent advantage. Ukrainian people are fighting to defend her independence, her territorial integrity and her security in the face of appalling, unprovoked violence. Violence which has destroyed lives, separated families, wounded hundreds of thousands of citizens and razed cities to the ground. And yet, President Zelensky has not wavered in strength or dignity. His people have not laid down arms. Russia has not succeeded in reaching its war aims, despite sending hundreds of thousands of troops to their deaths or to be wounded on the front lines. But now, as a result of all this unnecessary carnage, millions of Ukrainian children have never known peace, while Western democracy has never been under such relentless attack from within. Misinformation, propaganda, malicious interpretations of history, arrogance, ignorance, prejudice and hate are being used to divide us. Only yesterday, after Russia launched a drone attack on a civilian building in Kharkiv, the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said, "We see the collective West has started to become less collective. A fragmentation of the collective West has begun." That is precisely what Russia wants its people and the world to believe. That is precisely what Putin wants us to believe. We must be ever vigilant to the threat of disinformation, which takes the shape of the Kremlin's talking points. Russia was not provoked to invade Ukraine in 2014 or in 2022. No credence should be given to deflection tactics blaming NATO for expansion for Russian aggression. Each and every country in NATO is a democracy that has made its own sovereign choice to become a member, and many of the countries on NATO's eastern flank have recent experience of living under Russian threat. The strong international solidarity and dedication to achieving peace in Ukraine was evident for all to see at the Security Summit in London this weekend. And the vast majority of European leaders have only one message: their unreserved condemnation of illegal Russian aggression. Therefore, Ukraine's allies should all have one aim and one aim only: to support Ukraine's independence, her territorial integrity and her security. So I wholeheartedly welcome the Prime Minister's Coalition of the Willing initiative to provide Ukraine with security guarantees after a ceasefire agreement, as well as the £1.6 billion missile deal for Ukraine. I also accept the case for peacekeeping forces to avert further conflict, subject to proper scrutiny and a vote in the House of Commons. And I understand the delicate balance of diplomacy the Prime Minister and the United Kingdom Government must navigate in this matter. So I want to make clear my commitment and the commitment of my government to a united front, my commitment to do all that I can to support Ukraine to succeed. But I am sure, like the many European leaders who expressed their solidarity with President Zelensky this weekend, I am very disturbed by how his meeting with the US President and Vice President played out last week. I agree with President Zelensky's statement that Ukraine wants its partners to remember who the aggressor is in this war. And we must see unwavering unity across this political spectrum in full solidarity with Ukraine on this essential point. The events at the Oval Office meeting with President Zelensky and the announcement made this morning of a pause in US military aid to Ukraine can only run the risk of emboldening Russia, the aggressor. As I said this weekend, if this were to remain the posture of the US government, a second state visit for the US President Donald Trump becomes unthinkable. I know there are people in this chamber and across this country who will disagree, who will say that we should not contemplate this stance, or who will say that President Trump should not be invited under any circumstances. I understand and respect those points of view, but I cannot share them. Right now, today, as we stand here, men, women and children in Ukraine are putting their lives and their freedom on the line to defend their country and all of our democracies. We say we support them, and we do, but that means being willing to do things that are hard, things that we would rather not do. So if a state visit could help solidify US support for Ukraine, if that is part of what supporting Ukraine means in practice, then it is a possibility. For that to be true, however, the US would have to sustain the steadfast support of Ukraine, her independence and her territorial integrity. As we think through all these issues, the important questions are the hard-headed, clear-eyed consideration of what is best for Ukraine and European security today. For my government, that means standing steadfast behind Ukraine and alongside the United Kingdom Government and our European allies, and that is exactly what Scotland will do. My hope is that US and European leaders can once again find a way to speak with one voice on the matter of this conflict. There are no grey areas when one country chooses to send troops and tanks into the peaceful territory of another. My government supports the approach of the United Kingdom Government in committing to secure international solidarity in support of Ukraine's long-term future. We welcome the 100-year partnership recently agreed by the United Kingdom and Ukraine, and Scotland will play our part, whether as part of the United Kingdom or as an independent nation in the future, in helping to deliver it. I also welcome the approach of the Prime Minister and the proposed four-point plan to end the war and defend Ukraine from Russia. As I have already stated, Scotland accepts the case for the deployment of any peacekeeping forces to avert future conflict, subject to scrutiny and a vote by MPs in the House of Commons. And my government remains committed to supporting Ukraine until a just peace is secured, not a peace at any cost, which strips Ukraine of her sovereignty in wartime. So let me once again make clear, there can be no truly sincere or constructive peace talks about the future of Ukraine without Ukraine present at the negotiating table. And securing the future of Ukraine is utterly vital to securing the peace we have enjoyed in Europe for so long. Ukraine's future and her fate is our future and our fate. So we must aspire to be as courageous as the people of Ukraine and stand by them always in their hour of need. And we must maintain unity with our partners across Europe and the Western world, unity like that demonstrated in London this weekend and at Edinburgh Castle last week. Because events in Ukraine are having, and will continue to have, a direct negative impact on Scotland's economy, security and society. Presiding Officer, Scotland's approach internationally will continue to be led and guided by our compassion for Ukraine. I know this Chamber will continue to work together on these matters and to put any differences aside in respect of our common efforts to uphold justice. Now 25 years into the life of this modern Parliament, Scotland chooses to stand for democracy, for human rights and the rule of law at home and among our courageous allies like Ukraine. These are the underpinnings of democracy, of prosperity and of every freedom democracy provides. This is the solidarity among allies that will deliver Ukraine from Russia's barbaric aggression while protecting her heritage, her culture and her social and economic future. We have been honoured across Scotland that thousands of Ukrainians have made their home in our country. My message to people from Ukraine living here in Scotland is that you are and always will be very welcome here. Providing support and sanctuary for Ukrainian people displaced by Russia's brutal war continues to be a priority for the Scottish Government. I want Ukrainians everywhere to know that they also have Scotland's fullest support. I know many of them will be deeply concerned by what has unfolded over the last few days. It is for those brave Ukrainians and every person protected by democracy that Scotland will never be silent. Here in Scotland, we will forever stand with Ukraine.
Thank you. The First Minister will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement. I intend to allow around 30 minutes for questions. It would be helpful if members who wish to put a question were to press their request to speak buttons. And I call on Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We are honoured to be joined today by the Consul of Ukraine in Edinburgh in the public gallery. For more than a century, the United Kingdom and the United States have been the strongest of friends and allies, our bonds forged by shared values of freedom and democracy. During the First and Second World Wars, we fought alongside other allies to defeat fascism. In the Cold War, our unity and resolve prevented the very real threat of a Third World War and defeated the tyranny of the Soviet Union. Today, however, the old alliances that have endured throughout our lifetimes do not seem as certain. Last week's disturbing public disagreement between the Presidents of the United States and Ukraine feels seismic. For the sake of the heroic people of Ukraine suffering slaughter at Putin's hands, politicians in this country should recognise the responsibility we have. It is critical to do whatever we can to repair rather than exacerbate these rifts. Grandstanding comments, such as those from some senior SNP politicians, are self-indulgent and counterproductive. They risk sowing division between Western allies to the delight of the Kremlin and other despotic and dangerous regimes. Today, the First Minister rightly points out that Russia wants a fragmented West. We have seen their interference in Scottish politics and across Europe. So when John Swinney suggests that President Trump's state visit should be cancelled, how did he think that would help fragile Western unity? Today he says the visit should be conditional on, and I quote, "The US would have to sustain the steadfast support of Ukraine, her independence and territorial integrity." Does the First Minister really believe that he has the power to lay down conditions on the US, lacking any meaningful detail, and effectively expect the King to heed his terms? And finally, I'd like to ask John Swinney about his comment that our nuclear deterrent provides, and I quote, "no tangible or realistic benefit," and that nuclear weapons, again quoting, "are not stopping conflict in the world today." John Swinney is wrong. He is dangerously and naively wrong. Ukraine bitterly regrets forfeiting its own nuclear deterrent. During the Cold War, it would have been immense folly to surrender our nuclear deterrent. And with Ukraine, the United Kingdom, Europe and NATO no longer certain of what American future support might look like, this is even more true today. So does John Swinney recognise that in these serious times, the SNP's stance on nuclear weapons is not a serious policy?
First Minister.
President, first of all, may I associate myself with the welcome to the Consul-General of Ukraine, and I'm glad that he is here to hear these exchanges and the solidarity that we have for the people of Ukraine. There's actually a lot in what Russell Finlay has said with which I agree and empathise. I have lived through many certainties throughout my life, the certainties of the integral nature of the alliance between the around the Western world and the foundations of solidarity between the United States and the United Kingdom. And I recognise the centrality of those relationships in creating the peace and stability that I have experienced all of my life, and I welcome that. I agree with Russell Finlay that those certainties have been weakened by recent days, and that, I think, poses significant questions with which we have got to wrestle. I think in that context, I have set out very measured remarks about the importance of ensuring that when we are trying to build those alliances, we all have to know where we stand. And the United Kingdom expressing the desire to extend a state visit welcome to President Trump seems to me to be the type of commitment that should be given to an ally on which we are working in consort with. And the uncertainties that Mr Finlay has talked about are uncertainties that we are all wrestling with now. So that's the rationale for me setting out the view that I've set out, which is my deeply held view, and it can be observed by whoever wishes to observe my view. But I think it's right in a democracy that we say what we think and what we feel. That's the essence of democracy, is it not? And lastly, on the question of nuclear weapons, I made no secret of the fact that my entire life I have not supported the possession of nuclear weapons. Indeed, the concerns about the possession of nuclear weapons was one of the reasons why I decided to pursue the particular politics that I have pursued all of my adult life, in a party that's been committed to nuclear disarmament all of its days. But I would simply observe to Russell Finlay today that with all the possession of nuclear weapons today, Ukraine has been invaded. And that is the reality of what we're facing. So nuclear weapons have not deterred Russia from invading Ukraine. And indeed, the challenges that are faced just now in Ukraine to ensure that Ukraine is able to sustain its military operations are conventional weaponry, which I think we should have more of at our disposal. So those are the arguments that I would put forward. But of course, we live in a democracy in which there has to be tolerance of other people's views, which may be different to the views of others. And that's why I am so determined to make sure that we stand with Ukraine, because by standing with Ukraine, we do all we can to protect the democratic values that have been central to our society today.
Anas Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I join others in welcoming the Consul-General of Ukraine to the Parliament? I was speaking to him just before we came into the chamber, and he was emphasising how much it means to the great people of Ukraine to know that they have the resolute support of the people of Scotland and the people right across the United Kingdom. Presiding Officer, I welcome and thank the First Minister for his statement today. No one wanted to see the scenes that unfolded on Friday night at the White House. For 3 years, Ukraine, led by Volodymyr Zelensky, has defended itself against the odds. And the world has looked on in admiration and respect as the people of Ukraine have heroically stood up to brutal Russian aggression. Last week, I, like the First Minister and other party leaders, stood with the Ukrainian community in Scotland to mark the anniversary of the Russian invasion and to commemorate the lives lost. And the events of the last week are a defining moment for peace and security in Europe. It requires serious grown-up leadership, not Twitter diplomacy. It's an issue of war and peace and of life and death. So politicians should not resort to childish attacks on social media for perceived party interest, but instead prioritise peace and the national interest. Keir Starmer is right to say that he will only take the actions that help achieve peace, not actions to undermine it. That's what should guide all of us. That's why he spent this weekend meeting President Zelensky and the leaders of 18 nations. And the Prime Minister is assembling a coalition to find a path that will end the war and ensure Ukraine's sovereignty is backed up by strong security guarantees. That means working together for long-term peace in Europe, and it means taking tough decisions like prioritising defence spending. Security is the first responsibility of every government, and all our actions should be guided by the need for peace. Scotland and all of the UK stands alongside Ukraine in its hour of need, and we should all recommit to the cause of peace and freedom across Europe, but the cause of peace and freedom across the world. So does the First Minister agree that if the result of this diplomacy and these actions is lasting peace in Europe, then it will be worth it?
First Minister.
In short, yes. And I welcome the role that the Prime Minister has taken in recent months, weeks and days, and particularly intensively in recent days, to try to establish a way through the very challenging situation that we now face. And I think the engagement with European leaders and with leaders of other countries, the Prime Minister of Canada, has been particularly effective in drawing together a body of opinion that can help to create some of the cohesion that is required to support Ukraine at this particular moment. So these discussions are fundamental to assembling the correct approach, and I have made it very clear publicly that we support the Prime Minister in his endeavours. There will, of course, be difficult issues that flow from the plans that the Prime Minister has set out, not least of which is the possibility of armed personnel from this country being deployed in Ukraine. Now, that is some way off, as we all know. But it is important that we contemplate those issues, that we discuss them properly and fully and openly as a society with democratic scrutiny, so we can come to the right conclusions. Because where I fundamentally agree with Mr Sarwar is that the future of European democracy is very much in play at this moment. And what happens in the course of the next few days, weeks and months will shape so much of the future that lies ahead of us. And we have to make sure that we take actions that will protect the democratic values that we have all experienced during our lives and which are so precious in our society today.
Patrick Harvie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to start by joining others in welcoming the Consul-General and by recognising the impact of these discussions both on Ukraine and on Ukrainians living in Scotland. The Scottish Greens stand fully in support of the political unity in defence of Ukraine's sovereignty, which the First Minister has spoken of, and which I had hoped all political parties would express here today instead of making party political points. I also want to recognise the dignity of President Zelensky and his courageous display of self-respect in the face of the astonishing mistreatment he was subjected to on Friday. He told the truth and challenged Russian propaganda. Scotland has strong solidarity with Ukraine and is outraged at those who would abandon them to an aggressor. But these events threaten all countries, including our own. Trump's choice to realign the US with Russia, and not only against Ukraine but against democratic Europe, is clear. And it's astonishing that some voices in the UK's politics and media are pretending that the world hasn't changed fundamentally. So I want to ask the First Minister about a matter within his own devolved responsibility. Following the US decision to cease cybersecurity operations against Russia, does the First Minister agree that he must ensure that the data and systems relating to all functions of the Scottish Government and Scottish Public Services must be secured? And will he urgently commission a review to identify whether any current or potential US partner company should now be considered a security risk?
First Minister.
President Officer, let me make 2 points in response to what Patrick Harvie has said. The first is the importance of truth, and Patrick Harvie used that term. And truth is so important in the conduct of these issues because we all know that Ukraine as a democratic society was invaded by an aggressor, Russia, and nothing should be expressed that does not make that point centrally in this discussion. And secondly, on the question of cybersecurity, the Government keeps all issues in relation to cybersecurity actively under review at all times. And indeed, the Cabinet was briefed this morning by the Justice Secretary, who has responsibility for civil contingencies and resilience within the Government, of the steps that have been taken to review our posture, because the issues that we are now facing as a society, as a country, are affected by the Ukrainian conflict and the events that are taking their course. And we have to be satisfied in the Scottish Government, and we in this respect will work closely with the United Kingdom Government in that respect. We must be certain that we are doing all that we can to protect the resilience and the resolve and the capacity and the capability of our country, and that includes our data systems into the bargain. So Cabinet will be briefed on these issues on a regular basis by the Justice Secretary, and taking forward the point that we agreed this morning of the importance of that exercise being carried out.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too welcome the appearance of the Ukrainian Consul General, our friend Slava Ukraine, Heroyam Slava. President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine are heroes. They deserve sovereignty, a fair and lasting peace, and the steadfast support of the entire world. What we witnessed in the Oval Office on Friday was appalling. In a premeditated act of thuggery, Vice President Vance and President Trump tried to humiliate one of the bravest leaders of our time on the international stage. It feels like America could be on the verge of a betrayal of Ukraine. But asking the King to withdraw the offer of a state visit would throw away the most significant leverage that we may have to influence Trump's thinking on Ukraine and America's place in the Western alliance. So I welcome the apparent movement of the First Minister on this in his statement today, as uncomfortable as that may be for many of us. So can I ask him, with the withdrawal of US aid overnight, does the First Minister agree with Liberal Democrat calls to seize the tens of billions of pounds worth of frozen Russian assets here in the UK and use them to support Ukraine's fight for survival?
First Minister.
First of all, President, so let me just say to Mr Cole-Hamilton that what I've said on the issue of the state visit is what I've been saying all weekend. So there's nothing different about what I've said to Parliament today compared to what I said at the weekend. On the question of withdrawal of US aid and the implications in relation to the financial support for Ukraine from frozen Russian assets, there is obviously there's a very real issue which again was discussed at the Cabinet this morning, between the use of the interest on frozen assets and the use of those frozen assets themselves. And that's obviously a subject of discussion amongst European partners. I think given the basis on which Russia has invaded Ukraine, I think those frozen assets, to me, are assets that should be contemplated being used in relation to supporting Ukraine in its time of need. Those issues have to be considered actively by European leaders, and I know that those questions are being actively debated But he makes a point which is a reasonable point to consider in a time where the rule of law has been disregarded by Russia. And that merits a response which enables us to protect the rule of law and to protect democracy. And those issues should therefore be considered.
I call Rona Mackay to be followed by Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's been an absolute privilege to welcome Ukrainian people to Scotland during this difficult time. But in this time of increased uncertainty, particularly over the last few days, many will understandably be concerned about what the future holds for their country at home. What's the First Minister's message to Ukrainian people living in Scotland at this difficult time?
First Minister.
President Officer, Rona Mackay highlights the unease and anxiety that must be felt by Ukrainian citizens living in this country. Their lives have been turned upside down and they are now living far from their home and far from many of their loved ones. So I understand the anxiety that they will be felt. My message to those individuals will be to express the solidarity and the assurance of the support and assistance of Scotland to those individuals living in our community, and Scotland will be absolutely true to maintaining that support and that assistance to those individuals.
Well, Rachel Hamilton to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The statement from the First Minister today rightly acknowledges the danger of division in our society. We all want a path for peace, but President Trump's recent decision has sent a bitter blow to the people of Ukraine. And in light of the withdrawal of US military aid, does the First Minister accept that at times of peril like this, that as part of the United Kingdom, Scotland can play a crucial role in efforts to support Ukraine with our world-leading defence sector based in Scotland? And will he now drop his party's call to scrap Trident in the interest of global security?
First Minister.
I think there's obviously, we have a number of companies in Scotland who are involved in the manufacture of military equipment. Some of that military equipment is manufactured for our own use here. A lot of it is also exported to other countries. Those companies make an important economic contribution to Scotland, and in a conflict environment, they play a pivotal role in ensuring that people in Ukraine can properly defend themselves from Russian aggression. So we, of course, welcome their participation in our economy, and they will be able to pursue their dialogue with the United Kingdom Government, who has responsibility for defence procurement. And as I said in my response to Russell Finlay, I have had a long-standing view that we should not possess nuclear weapons, and nothing in the current environment persuades me to change that view.
Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The US administration seems determined to appease the Kremlin's butcher of Bucha and seek a Carthaginian peace that makes the Treaty of Versailles look sensible. However, critical to peace is a guarantee of the security, territorial integrity and independence of Ukraine. First Minister, in terms of European solidarity, what can the Scottish Government and individuals do to show our continued support for a just peace for the people of Ukraine at this exceptionally difficult time?
First Minister.
I think the importance of a guarantee of security is absolutely fundamental in this discussion, because without a guarantee of security, then the suffering of the people of Ukraine in the course of the last 3 years will have been for nothing should they be exposed to further Russian aggression. So the point that Mr Gibson puts to me is vital. That's why I set out the Government's position here today, to contribute to the discussion that is underway across a range of European and Western countries about how collectively and collaboratively we can assure the security of Ukraine. Because if we do not secure the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine, then I think we will be acting in a manner that will undermine the safety and the security of Western democracy, and we must not take that step. So therefore, the point I would make to Mr Gibson is the importance of us contributing to that European dialogue, to work with the United States to deliver the security that Ukraine requires, because if we don't do that, we will, I fear, see more of the aggression that we have seen from Russia in the future.
Neil Bibby, to be followed by Audrey Nicholl.
The Consul of Ukraine to Scotland, who is in the gallery, told this Parliament clearly just a few days ago that Ukraine needs free powers, weapons, economic sanctions and diplomacy. I welcome that over the last few days the Prime Minister has taken action on all three, pledged more weapons for Ukraine funded by sanctions on Russian assets and provided steadfast diplomatic support. Can I ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government will do to support the Prime Minister and the UK Government provide the things that Ukraine says it needs? And when he rightly talks about the need for a united front, does he agree that applies not only to our actions but our words, and that nothing will be said by members of his Government that undermine the efforts of the Prime Minister to support Ukraine and find a lasting peace?
First Minister.
Well, I don't think I could have been clearer about the support of the Scottish Government for the efforts of the Prime Minister, and that's expressed openly and genuinely to Parliament, and I wish the Prime Minister well in what he is trying to achieve. I don't underestimate the scale of the challenge that he faces, but I wish him well in that effort, and we will take whatever steps we can to support him in that dialogue, to ensure there is cohesion, there is resolution, to ensure that the security guarantees I talked about to Kenneth Gibson can be delivered for the people of Ukraine and their sovereignty can be protected.
Audrey Nicholl, to be followed by Jackson Carlaw.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week, the Consul of Ukraine in Scotland also told the Parliament's Constitution Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee that Ukraine requires, and I quote, not only peace but a just peace. Does the First Minister agree with this, and what would his message be on this matter?
First Minister.
The people of Ukraine have suffered enormously, and it is vital that the peace settlement that is achieved is a settlement that protects the independence and the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Those are the requirements of a just peace, and I think they should comprise the approach that is taken to confront Russia and to ensure that the aspirations, the legitimate aspirations of the people of Ukraine are fulfilled as a consequence of that support from the West.
Jackson Carlaw, to be followed by Keith Brown.
Presiding Officer, can I associate myself with the remarks of the First Minister and also acknowledge the work of the Prime Minister? It's important he knows he's acting on behalf of us all. President Zelensky, if not quite like Churchill standing alone, is certainly standing on the front line in this contest. It is the blood, toil, tears and sweat of the Ukrainian people that are defending democracy in the West. And I wonder, First Minister, if you would support a suggestion that an invitation from you and the presiding officer of this Parliament be extended, an open invitation to President Zelensky at a time of his choosing and convenience to address this Parliament. There is a precedent for this, we've done it before, but to invite him to address this Parliament and for that to be in conjunction with this Parliament convening a national day of solidarity with the people of Ukraine.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I would readily associate myself with the suggestion made by Jackson Carlaw. Invitations to Parliament are, of course, a matter for the Presiding Officer and the parliamentary authorities, but for my part in the Government, we would happily support such an endeavour. I think Mr Carlaw raises an important opportunity for us as a country to come together to express our solidarity with the people of Ukraine, and I would be very happy to take part in any discussions on the important suggestion that he has made. And I think also, may I say how welcome it is that Mr Carlaw makes clear his support from his political position to the work the Prime Minister is trying to undertake to try to resolve what is an extremely serious situation that we currently face.
Thank you. Keith Brown, to be followed by Jackie Dunbar.
Can I welcome the First Minister's strong support for the principle of Ukrainian territorial integrity, its independence and for the principle of self-determination. The First Minister has acknowledged that personnel and other resources from Scotland may be deployed in any coalition of the willing in terms of democratic Europe's response to Russian aggression. Does he agree that the decades-long depletion of armed forces personnel and equipment in the UK armed forces requires rearmament whether it's with the EU partners or non-EU partners, which should contribute to more effective recruitment. Armed Forces personnel driven by improved pay, greatly improved equipment and in relation to individual conventional weapons and cyber resources, and the provision of relevant training opportunities rather than squandering any resources on the immoral, utterly ineffective and increasingly irrelevant nuclear arsenal.
First Minister.
President, so Mr Brown, of course, speaks with the authority of having been a member of the Armed Forces and who served in active combat in the Falklands War in 1982. So, as on many issues, I have the greatest of respect for the contribution that Keith Brown has made to public life and public service in our country in that respect, in the service in the Armed Forces, which I have never undertaken. He does acknowledge and knows the seriousness and the significance of deploying armed forces into roles of danger. The approach the Prime Minister is suggesting is to essentially be in a position to protect and assure the security of Ukraine, but that does not come without its dangers in relation to the behaviour of Russia, which we all know to have been malevolent. So the issues that Mr Brown raises are very significant about the choices that have to be made about the deployment of armed personnel, and that is why I believe these issues should be considered and discussed openly in the House of Commons to enable a democratic decision to be made, and fundamentally for us to act in solidarity with the Ukrainian people in protecting their independence.
Jackie Dunbar, to be followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We must be steadfast in our support for Ukraine at this uncertain time, and I echo the need for international solidarity to defeat Russian aggression. Can the First Minister provide an update regarding the financial support that the Scottish Government has made available to support the humanitarian response to the conflict in Ukraine? First Minister.
The Scottish Government has provided in excess of £5 million in relation to humanitarian assistance in Ukraine. That has been providing essential supplies in relation to health, water, sanitation and shelter. And of course there will have been additional support that's been provided for Ukrainian citizens coming to Scotland and making this country their home.
Pauline McNeill, to be followed by Kevin Stewart.
Our hearts go out to the people of Ukraine for what they have endured and their hopes for peace and security for their nation and their right to sovereignty. Does the First Minister agree that we live in complicated and dangerous times with the rise of the right in Europe and the unpredictability of the US administration, and therefore we must strive for peace and stability in Europe and influence where we can all nations at war? And that includes peace and security in the Middle East, where Europe could play a leading role for peace.
First Minister.
Pauline McNeill will know that I come at my politics from the perspective of believing in the necessity of European cooperation and for active participation in European decision-making and in European governance. So I very much welcome the summit that took place, which was fundamentally of European leaders at the weekend that the Prime Minister hosted. I think that's an indication of really good intention on these questions. She's absolutely right that I'm certain there is more that at a European level could be undertaken to support peacemaking in the Middle East. We all watch with horror the events that are taking place, continuing to take place in Gaza as we speak. And the level of conflict in the world today is intolerable, and we have to use every available device at our disposal to make sure that we work to bring communities together and to avoid conflict in the way that we're experiencing conflict today.
Kevin Stewart, to be followed by Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We all want to see a just peace, and to achieve that, it is in Scotland's interest that we support Ukraine and its people's right to freedom, democracy and independence. History shows us that appeasing aggressors expands conflicts and prolongs wars. Does the First Minister share my view, though, that no one who believes in democracy can afford to appease Putin and Russia's aggression?
First Minister.
I agree with that point, because I think the threat to our democracy and to the values that have underpinned our society is real if we are not able to address and defeat the aggression of Russia. That's the very real issue that we face as a society today. That is why this issue is so important and fundamental to the choices we face.
Stephen Kerr, to be followed by Emma Harper.
This is a wholly reserved matter, but the First Minister is right to express our united solidarity and support of Ukraine and the people of Ukraine, including those who now live among us in Scotland. But one of the lessons and measures that must now be taken by Britain is that we must, as Keith Brown said, rearm. And that will mean increases in defence expenditure, which are to be welcomed. The lesson of history is that securing the peace is best done through strength, and Scotland is critically important in that, because this is the location of many important defence contractors. So does the First Minister agree with what I have just said? And if he does, will he take this opportunity to disavow the hostility of so many SNP, MSPs and MPs towards the defence sector? In fact, there are ministers that won't even meet defence contractors. And will he take this opportunity to give his wholehearted support to these important businesses and their employees?
First Minister.
Stephen Kerr is correct that the issues of international relations are wholly reserved matters, but I would contend that these wholly reserved matters have an impact on our way of life. And if we don't confront these issues as a Parliament, I don't think we are addressing properly the challenges that face all of our communities as a consequence of the situations that we face. Now, there is a need for us to have effective defence forces available to us. Part of my argument is that I think we have a vast coastline and a vast airspace around Scotland, which is critical to the security of Western Europe, which is critical to the security of our country, which I think would be strengthened. Our ability to defend that would be strengthened by a greater emphasis on conventional weaponry than the investment that has been made in nuclear defences. And that's my reflection on the defence priorities that we should face. And in relation to the defence sector in Scotland, Scotland does have a very strong number of companies who are involved in defence-related activities. Those companies make a significant contribution to the economy of Scotland. I welcome the work that they undertake, and it's important that we recognise that and the difficulties that we face at the present time.
Emma Harper, to be followed by Paul Sweeney.
Nearly 48,000 Ukrainians have found refuge here in Scotland over the last 3 years, with about 800 being housed in Dumfries and Galloway. Their transition to life here has been hard, but it's been made easier by the huge work carried out by local agencies and volunteers, including my constituent Peter Cormillo, who has worked tirelessly to help Ukrainian refugees navigate our national quirks. Does the First Minister agree, as well as the official support from government, local and national, and support from Peter and many thousands like him across Scotland, that has to be valued, and it's been invaluable and a shining example of humanity across our borders?
First Minister.
So right around the country there will be various local groups. Indeed, I met a group from South Ayrshire just one day last week who'd come to Parliament, and they've been providing welcoming support to individuals. So Peter, that Emma Harper referred to, will have made that contribution. This group from South Ayrshire will have done so, and members from across the country, as I have seen in my own community in Highland Perthshire, in Aberfeldy, or in the work that's undertaken in Errol to support families and to dispatch assistance to Ukraine, have all made a huge contribution, which is deeply valued by the Scottish Government.
Paul Sweeney, to be followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister rightly recognised the contribution that Scottish industry has made to the defence of Ukraine, and to further bolster that effort, would he consider reconvening the Aerospace, Defence, Marine and Security Industry Leadership Group, which has been dormant for some years, and appoint a ministerial co-chair?
First Minister.
I think that there's work that has been undertaken to reform the industry leadership groups that have taken place, and I think there is engagement with the defence sector, but I better check that point for Mr Sweeney, and I know there is ministerial interaction on all of these questions.
Fulton McGregor, to be followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware that a large number of Ukrainian families fleeing the war have been resettled in North Lanarkshire, with many being housed in refurbished tower blocks in Coatbridge in my constituency. As my constituents, my thoughts are very much with them at this unsettling time, and I have written out to them this week to remind them that they can contact me in my office at any time. Can the First Minister outline what ongoing supports there are in place to ensure that these families and the thousands like them across the country continue to be supported in our communities and feel the strength of our unwavering solidarity at this most difficult time?
First Minister.
So the support to Ukrainian families in Scotland will come from a combination of some of the community support that I know Mr McGregor's constituency will have offered, and which Emma Harper just raised with me in her question, but then also with some of the work undertaken by the Scottish Government and our partners. And that has always been important, but I think it's ever more important given the uncertainties that the people of Ukraine feel at this moment.
And John Mason.
Thank you. The First Minister indicates that he thinks we probably should be increasing defence spending, and I would certainly agree with that. But would he agree that also that that money should not be coming from the international aid budget?
First Minister.
I think what I said at the weekend on this question is that I think we've got to have an honest and open discussion about the public expenditure priorities of the United Kingdom. I tried to have that during the general election campaign, where I was pointing out that our public services were under enormous fiscal pressure, and we had to improve the finances available for our public services. These issues that we are now confronting, affecting our defence and security, merit a response in that respect as well. So we have to have an honest discussion about our priorities. I don't view this as an either-or, that we can afford defence expenditure or we can afford public services. I equally take the view that John Mason is marshalling today, that reductions in overseas aid expenditure can be short-sighted, because we have got to change the nature of the inequality. We've got to address the inequalities in our world. Overseas aid is fundamental to doing that. That's been a shared priority of many governments over many years, and it's important that we address these priorities, but we can only do so with an honest discussion about the public finances and an honest discussion about the choices that are available in relation to taxation, and we need to have that.
Thank you. That concludes the First Minister's statement on international solidarity to support Ukraine, and there will be a brief pause before we move on to the next item of business.